of others, or how sometimes our own power inadvertently impacts others in ways we don't intend. These are questions that are top of mind for many of us, often daily. And I am really looking forward to exploring Esther and her story tonight in the company of our incredible educators, and with our amazing partners, the Gender Equity and Hiring Project and jGirls magazine. We'll hear about their incredible work from their inspirational founders a bit later, Sarah Shapiro-Plevin and Elizabeth Mandel. Thank you for being here, who are both personal mentors and heroes of mine. So I'm so glad to be able to share tonight with them. I really personally find myself learning so much from the stories and experiences of others, which is why I want to give an enormous thank you to those of you who contributed to our Power Plays story wall. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. It's just, you got to read it. We don't talk about our complicated encounters with power often enough, and I think we miss out on learning opportunities. We've been collecting your stories about your experiences with power, and I really just urge you to go read what was shared and to contribute your own story so that we can learn from you. Before I hand tonight off to Rabba Nidaliza, the director and visionary behind everything that is HerTorah, and her bio will be in the chat, we have two short power play readings, just a short sampling that were very, very hard to choose because there were so many very amazing, powerful ones, pun intended. So you have to promise to go and read them all, and you'll see the link to do so in the chat. But if it's okay, could I ask Rebecca to start us off with the first one? And Willa, do you mind putting it up on the screen so that we can read along?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Willa, and thank you, Ariella. I'm gonna reading, and you'll see it come up on the screen in a moment. Okay, does that sound good? So we move forward. This says, thank you to whoever sent this in to us. I think that they've all been really beautiful and difficult to read both. Years ago, when I had 3 small children, I was experiencing tremendous fatigue, aches all over my body, a rash on my face, and sores in my mouth. I went to a male doctor who told me I was fine, and imagining and exaggerating these symptoms. Later that day, he called my husband to tell him that because I had 3 young children, so close in age, and a new home, I needed help at home, and then I would be okay. Obviously, I switched to a female doctor. 5 months later, I was diagnosed with lupus. I don't know if I was more infuriated that he didn't believe me or that he had the nerve to involve my husband.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Katie, are you okay to read the next one?
Sure. Here's the next one. I was sitting across from the board chair negotiating my salary. He looked at me and said, I know that your father-in-law makes a tidy salary. You don't need to work. Why should I give you a raise? I never felt more powerless. Not only was my salary not about my value or my work, but it was put in terms of my marital relationships. I felt sick.
Lisa, all you. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Katie, and to everybody who contributed these stories. Well, I think we can go back to our thank you very much. And we will have more of these Power Play stories later on in the evening, but I also encourage you to go to our Power Play wall and read all of the stories. Thank you again to everybody who contributed. So my name is Eliza Sperling. I'm the director of HerTorah. Oh boy, I see myself really big right here. Let me change that. I am so happy that you're here. HerTorah is really an experiment. It's an experiment of what happens when you bring women from all types of Jewish backgrounds together to learn their Torah, to learn Torah together, to bring in their own perspectives, and also to acknowledge that our own lived experiences and what we bring to the table are also Torah. How do we kind of integrate it all, what we call Torah? And that is the experiment that the amazing, wonderful Ariella Mordkowitz, who puts heart and soul into everything that she does, and especially into SVIVAH, that we've worked on. And it's really always an experiment, right? It's always a work in progress. Thank you for being part of this experiment together. I'm so excited for tonight, where we will hear from wonderful teachers about women and power in the book of Esther. And I especially want to thank our first teacher, Rabba Wendy Amsellem, who really brainstormed the whole topic with me. Let me tell you a little bit about Rabba Wendy. Rabba Wendy Amsellem teaches Halacha at Yeshivat Maharat and directs the Beit Midrash program, a joint project of Maharat and Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. Rabba Wendy received smicha, ordination, from Yeshivat Maharat, and is an alumna of the Drisha Scholar Circle. She has a BA in History and Literature from Harvard University. And I asked all of our teachers to tell me their favorite costume that they've dressed up as for Purim. And Rabba Wendy, a few years ago, dressed up as Wendy from Wendy's. So Rabba Wendy, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a fun costume. I've always felt kind of a connection to the billboard ads once I drove past them. So it was kind of fun to have the red wig and the outfit. Okay, so should I just get started? Is that okay? Great. All right. So I'm going to begin by sharing some sources on my screen. Here we go. Okay, and I can try to make them a little bigger also. My guess is that's probably better for people. Okay, here we are. Okay, so I tonight want to talk about Esther, the character of Esther in the book of Esther, and I want to focus on one verse in particular. It's the verse that is bolded over here. It appears in the second chapter. In a moment, we'll talk about how we get to this verse, but the bolded verse is, Vatihi Esther nos'et chen be'enei kol ro'eha. Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And I always think that this is a really interesting verse, right? What does it mean to be a person who everyone likes, right? How is that even possible? What does Esther need to do to kind of get herself into that position? And kind of what does it mean for her to be pursuing that sort of likability? So if we look a little bit higher up over here, kind of how Esther came to be where she is, if you remember, the way the story goes in the first chapter of the book of Esther, Vashti, the queen, refuses to come when the king summons her. The king gets very angry. His advisors advise him to get rid of Vashti, and he does. Then in the beginning of the second chapter, the king wants a new queen. There's this plan where they're going to gather together all of the beautiful virgins, and the king will choose from amongst all of those. Then we see in verse 8, when the king's words and decree are heard, all the damsels, these beautiful damsels, are gathered together to Shushan, and they're actually all sort of placed in this place that's called the Beit Hanashim, the house of women, and they're placed under the care of a man named Haggai. In verse 9, we're told that Esther, the damsel, was very good in his eyes. She finds favor before him. And as a result, he kind of hurries to give her all the supplies that she needs. He hurries to give her cosmetics, various portions, these 7 maids that are going to help her out. And we're told he changed her and her maids to the best of the women's house, right? Basically makes sure that she has all of the things that she needs. Now, we don't really know why he likes her so much, right? The verse doesn't tell us what she does to make him like her, but she shows up. Something about her is very compelling to him, and he responds by trying to make things better for her, right? He gives her kind of the best of the things that are available. And then we're told in verse 10, Esther did not tell her people or her ancestry because Mordecai, who is her adopted father, commanded her not to tell. And if we wonder for a moment, why is it that Mordecai doesn't want her to reveal her ancestry? It's probably because he's worried that people will like her less, right? If they understand that she's from, the Jewish nation, they might not be as kind to her. They might not be as nice to her. It might hurt her chances of being queen. So she keeps her identity secret, as Mordecai told her to. Then I skipped a few verses in the interest of time, but basically there's a description of the beauty regimen of all these young women. They spend 6 months in oil and 6 months in different fragrant spices as they get ready. Each one of them kind of shows up for her night with the king. And we're told actually that on the night that each woman goes to the king, anything that she asks for is given to her for this night with the king. She can request whatever sorts of accessories and other things that she wants in order to kind of make the best possible impression on the king. Then in verse 15, we're told when it's the turn for Esther to come to the king, she didn't ask for anything, right? She could have asked for anything that she wants. And in fact, she chooses to ask for nothing. She just accepts whatever Haggai, the king's advisor, the king's chamberlain, who's the guardian of all the women, whatever he tells her to have, she takes, but she doesn't ask for anything on her own. And this is where we get to our verse that I want to focus on. Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Everyone who sees her likes her. And there's something that seems almost a little bit odd about that, right? How is it actually possible for one person to be liked by everyone, right? You know, usually not everyone likes everyone, right? So what about Esther is so compelling? And the rabbis, both in the Talmud and in the Midrash, are kind of interested in this question of what makes Esther so compelling to everyone who sees her. So if you look over here at source 2, this is a passage from the Babylonian Talmud from Tractate Megillah. Here we're told Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Rabbi Elazar says, "Milamed shelekol echad ve'echad nidmeta lo keumato." Each person who looks at her assumes that she is a member of his own people. So if we pause here for a moment, right, we want to remember that in the empire of Achashverosh, there are 127 provinces. There are all these different people there. Everybody kind of has, I guess, there's a sense that each have a preference sort of for their own individual nation, but they're all being brought together. And what the Talmud assumes is going on with Esther is that she looks familiar to everybody. Every person can kind of claim her as their own, which I think is interesting, right? The Talmud seems to be assuming that people like people who are similar to them, right? And that's why they like Esther. But there's also something about Esther that seems like it's almost nondescript, right? You know, how could each person assume that she's a member of their own people? It must be that she has something about her is kind of malleable, right? She could sort of appear to people as whoever they hope that she will be. They're hoping that she's one of them, and she looks to them like she's one of them. And the Talmud says that's why they all like her so much. Okay. If we look at the next source over here, this is from the Midrash on the book of Esther, from Esther Rabbah. Here we're told, what does the verse mean when it says that Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her? Rabbi Yehuda says, Esther was like a sculpture that 1,000 people can see and each one finds pleasing. Now, I guess if we were to think about it, right, what's the difference between the Talmud assuming that Esther looks like, everyone thinks that she looks like his or her own nation, versus the Midrash assuming that Esther is like a work of art. She's like a sculpture, right? They're both kind of similar in that each person who sees her kind of projects onto her what they're hoping to see, right? They're each kind of finding in her whatever ideal they are looking for. I think the Midrash is really interesting because in the Midrash, she's not even a person, right? She's just kind of this work of art. She's this sculpture that each person kind of projects their desires onto or their hopes onto, and she kind of becomes for all of them exactly what they hope that she will be. And I think that kind of part of what she'll need to do in order to sort of keep up that illusion is really sort of keep quiet about who she actually is, what her opinions actually are, right? The moment she shares something of herself, that sort of will shatter the illusion, right? If she starts talking, they'll realize she's not really a member of their nation. And if she has opinions or kind of does anything distinctive, right, then she'll no longer just be like this work of art that every person can admire. The idea of Esther sort of becoming whoever people want her to be reaches kind of a grotesque extreme in the last source that we'll see over here. This is from back in the Babylonian Talmud, again in Tractate Megillah. So if you remember a few verses later, when the king sees Esther, he loves her, right? The verse says that Esther loves, the verse says, Vayahav hamelech et Esther mikol hanashim. The king loves Esther above all the women. She finds grace and favor in his eyes more than all of the virgins. And the continuation of the verses, and he then makes her the queen. Rav says, why is she described as better than all the other women, and she finds favor in his eyes more than all the other virgins? Rav says, well, when the king is actually with Esther in bed, if he wants the experience of being with the virgin, that is the sort of experience he can have with her. And if he wants the experience of being with an experienced woman or a married woman, the king can also have that experience as well. So there's a sense that, like, even Esther's very body kind of can become whatever the king wants it to be, right? She can sort of shift from one moment to the next and sort of become whoever the king wants her to be. And that is, that's kind of given as the reason for why he loves her so much, right? He loves her because she can sort of become whoever it is that he is hoping that she will be in the moment. So when I first started noticing these things, it felt to me like there was something very interesting going on in terms of describing Esther as this person who's liked by everyone, who kind of becomes everybody's ideal. And I think that, on the one hand, Esther gets some benefits from being this person, right? As soon as she shows up in the house of women, right, she immediately is given all these privileges by Haggai because he likes her so much. And, the king chooses her. She gets to occupy the position of queen again because she is so sort of well-loved, I guess, even by the king. But I think it's also interesting to me to think about what's at stake in being the sort of person that everybody likes, right? We understand the advantages of it for Esther, but like what are the disadvantages? Or maybe a better way to put it would be, what are the costs of trying so hard to be liked by everybody? And I think if we look at that story that we saw in chapter 2, we already get a sense of some of the costs, right? If you remember, Esther doesn't tell anybody who she is, right? Mordecai tells her to keep her identity a secret. She keeps it a secret when she first gets to the king's palace. She keeps it a secret even after she becomes the queen. At the end of chapter 2, we're told that even when she's the queen, she still doesn't tell anybody. And I think that sometimes in order to be liked by everybody, there's a sense that we can't really let people know who we really are, right? If they knew who we really were, then they might not really like us. And so I think one of the costs for Esther is the sense of kind of needing to sort of keep herself sort of wrapped up and unknown, and she's not really able to express herself. I think kind of going along with that, another problem is that my sense is that Esther starts to kind of lose her sense of self, right? It's not just that she doesn't tell other people who she is, but I think she sort of loses touch herself with who she is. And the place in the chapter where I see that happening is, if you remember, every woman is allowed to ask for whatever they want for their night with the king. And Esther doesn't ask for anything. And my sense is she doesn't ask for anything because she doesn't have any preferences anymore. She doesn't have any of her own wants. She's kind of lost touch with like what it is that she might want to have. And I think that this happens sometimes if people are so focused on how other people see them and trying to be the sort of person who other people want them to be, you can kind of forget who you yourself are and forget what you yourself might want. And I think also very importantly for the story, if you remember later on in chapter 4, when Mordecai tells her about the decree to annihilate the Jewish people and tries to enlist Esther's help in overturning the decree, Esther at first says no, right? She doesn't think that she has any power to act. She thinks that all she can do is kind of be the person who everybody wants her to be the person who's liked by everybody. But if she needs to kind of push back against something or do something that is kind of goes against the expectations that people have of her, at first it's very hard for her to do that. And I think that kind of makes sense to me also, right? There's a way in which if you're constantly thinking about how to get everybody around you to like you, it's very hard to then think about doing something that might make them not like you, even if it's something that's really important, even if it's the most important thing, right? Saving her whole people. And as I thought more about Esther in this story, it just occurred to me that this is something that I think, sorry. something that I think is very present for many women, not just in Esther's time, but also today, this kind of sense of the great importance of being liked by other people. I remember when Hillary Clinton was running for president, there were always these articles about whether she was likable enough. Were her positions likable enough? Were her clothes likable enough? Was the way that she talked or walked likable enough? There's something about that feels very limiting, right? On the one hand, everybody wants to be liked, right? It's a good thing. It makes things easier if the people around you like you. But I think when there's kind of an over focus on the importance of being liked to the exclusion of other things, it winds up being very reductive, right? It means that you're kind of not really free to be yourself, to want the things that you want, to express yourself, to try to do things. And I think what I would love to talk about in the discussion part at the end of the hour is kind of what are the costs of this kind of likability, right? Like what's at stake in pursuing it? And then what are the things that we should look out for? What are the things that we have to worry that we are maybe sacrificing or maybe not even letting ourselves know that we want to do because we don't want to make other people upset or we don't want to make other people not like us. And I think that in Esther's story, one of the real challenges for her in chapter 4 that kind of she has to get past in order to be able to be willing to risk everything and save the Jewish people is kind of being able to be willing to do something that might make her, that might make the king angry at her, that might make other people like her less. Eventually, she's going to have to tell the king who she really is. She's going to have to tell him something that's really important to her, that she wants, that she needs to ask for, that she needs to demand even. And I think that in the same way that Esther can sort of at first serve as a cautionary tale of what might happen if women are kind of overly focused on being liked, I think by the end of the book, there's a way in which she's also a model of being able to sort of rise above that. So I look forward to having more of a discussion about this later, and I will turn things over to Zoe.
Oh, thank you so much, Rabba Wendy. We're going to jump over to you, Zoe, in a minute. I just had a couple of things I wanted to ask you, Rabba Wendy. The first thing, we've talked about this a little bit, but Mordechai is kind of the polar opposite of Esther in that Mordechai has no problem being disliked. In fact, many of the things that he does in the megillah, almost everybody dislikes him for it. So could you talk a little bit about, like, we have in the same family, we've got a Mordechai, we've got an Esther, and what do you think the megillah is doing, putting these two very different characters together like that?
Oh, it's such a good question, right? It seems right. So I think what Rabbanit Elisa is referring to is the moment at the beginning of chapter 3, where everyone else in court is bowing down to Haman, and Mordechai refuses to do that, and it makes Haman really angry at him. And then it makes that, by extension, the king then is kind of also brought into feeling this feeling of animosity, not just towards Mordechai, but towards his entire nation. And one kind of wonders, if people know that they are all now endangered because of Mordechai, does that make, everybody else also, at least all the other Jewish people be angry at Mordechai as well? So yeah, there is a way in which he seems to be not concerned at all with, with certainly the opinion of the people in court about him. Yeah, I don't know if there's kind of, I guess on the one hand, it seems like there's a kind of freedom to that, right? He thinks, we don't know why he doesn't want to bow down to Haman, but he thinks it's important and he's willing to sort of do the thing that he thinks is important without concern for how other people feel about it. On the other hand, it does, there's a way in which it also feels almost a little bit irresponsible, right? He does kind of really endanger everybody as a result. So I don't think that a total disregard for other people's sensibilities is what we're aiming for. But there is something very sort of powerful about Mordechai being willing to kind of take a stand about, for something that matters to him without kind of, we don't hear any sort of like wondering about what the implications of it. And there's something that seems very sort of strong-willed about that and inspiring in its own way.
Yeah, Thank you so much, Rabba Wendy. I have many more questions, but I'm going to save them for the end so that we can go on to hear our next wonderful teacher. Zoe Fertik is a Jewish educator who has previously worked for BINA, the Jewish Movement for Social Change, and the Osman Family JCC in Palo Alto. She lives in Paris. Guess what time it is for her right now? She lives in Paris. So we are super excited that she's here and that she's awake. And if she falls asleep in the middle, we will just go on as if it it will be fine, Zoe. It's fine. Zoe's Purim costume. Zoe always dresses up as a disco ball for Purim. Thanks so much for being with us.
I didn't bring my disco ball costume with me to Paris, so I'm at a loss for what to be this year. Hi, everybody. I'm Zoe. Yes, it is 2:45 in the morning where I live. But more importantly, I actually wanted to give an introduction by way of saying that this is actually the first time that I'm teaching since two major life events in my life. The first is I had a close family member die about a year ago, and then I also gave birth for the first time 7 months ago. And so this is my first time teaching since both of those things happened. And the only reason I'm doing it is because I love SVIVAH so much. And I think HerTorah is such a supportive, wonderful community that I felt like this was the right place to teach for the first time. So I just want to say thank you to the organizers and to this whole community of women. And also because I love Purim. Purim is a great holiday and it has so much to discuss. So I'm going to pick up right where Wendy left off. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to play on the exact same two verses that Wendy did. So thank you, Wendy. You and I are in sync here. We have this important verse in chapter 2 that Wendy showed us, which is that Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. And you said something that I felt was really important and powerful, Rabba Wendy, which is that you said if she had to keep silent so that people would like her, so that she couldn't reveal who she was, she couldn't show who she was, so that everybody could make of her what they wanted. And that works for her for a while. She keeps quiet. She doesn't tell anybody who she is, what she's thinking. And then the situation changes. And two chapters later, the Jews are in crisis. And Mordecai says, you actually have to speak up now, right? Don't imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter. If you keep silent, Esther, it's going to be that we're in trouble. Don't worry, the Jews are going to be fine, but you're there. You need to speak up. It's time for you to talk. And in the context, putting these two verses together, you can imagine the whiplash that Queen Esther is facing. She's saying, what? You told me to be quiet about who I am, and now you're telling me to talk? This being quiet about who I am, this keeping silent was working for me. Everybody likes me. I'm in this position of power in the king's house. I'm totally safe here. It was working for me, and now you're telling me to talk? The thing that I want to think about by putting these two verses together is that the crisis moment for the Jews, what Esther has to do is she has to stop staying silent. She has to speak up. And this is a big deal, not only for all women in power who are thinking about how we should use our speech to get what we want or to do the right thing. But the Midrash actually imagines that this is an extremely potent, poignant issue for Queen Esther, because she comes from, we don't know that much about Queen Esther. We don't know that much about these characters. But one thing we do know is that her uncle Mordecai is an Ish Yamini. He's a man from the house of Benjamin. And our Midrash teaches us that the Benjamin family loved being quiet. This is not just something that Esther did because it was working for her. It was actually something that was in her blood. Queen Esther was from the Benjaminite family, just like Rachel and Saul and Benjamin. And all of these characters, shows the Midrash, are actually people who practiced silence. Esther did not disclose her family, teaching that she practiced silence for herself, like her ancestor Rachel, who practiced the craft of silence. All her great descendants maintained silence. So Rachel, the original ancestor here, she was quiet in this important moment of tension between her sister Leah at fighting over their shared husband Jacob. So too Rachel's son Benjamin. He was a quiet guy, and the Midrash tells us he was quiet because of a play on words about the particular stone associated with Benjamin that's in the breastplate. It's a pun, which of course the Midrash loves and I love, but it's not a moment from a story, it's just a pun. But we have Rachel from the story, we know she's quiet. Benjamin from his breastplate, we know he was a quiet guy. And then Saul, the other important King Saul, the other member of the Benjaminite family, he also at a very important moment didn't tell, he was picky about his words. He didn't tell his uncle a particular piece of information that might have been important. He picked and chose what he was going to say. So all of these Benjaminite ancestors of our Queen Esther, they were quiet people. They practiced silence. This idea of Esther not revealing herself, it wasn't just a choice. This was in her blood. This is who she was. Now, that's one take from our Midrash about why Esther was quiet in that moment and why she practiced silence, why she didn't reveal herself. She was a Benjaminite. She wasn't a talker, as we say. But actually, there's also another possibility here about Esther and her silence. We've also learned from our story that silence, it doesn't work for women. It doesn't work well for women. We had a woman character in chapter 1. Her name was Vashti. She was the first queen. And our Midrash tells us that Vashti, she tried to have a conversation with the king at a moment of crisis, and it did not go well. And in fact, it's not just that she tried to talk her way out of this thing she didn't want to do with the king. In fact, she tried all sorts of rhetorical devices, tells the Midrash. Vashti, she tried to use speech to get what she wanted, and it did not work. Here's what the Midrash tells us. Vashti sent and said things to him, things that upset him. The him here is King Achashverosh. She sent messages, Vashti, and she said all these things, and King Achashverosh, he was upset. She said to him, if they consider me beautiful, they'll set their sights on taking advantage of me and they'll kill you. If they consider me ugly, you will be demeaned because of me. In this way, she alluded, she hinted, she used speech to make a hint. Hey, dude, don't do this. I'm hinting at you what's going to happen. And he didn't grasp the illusion. The illusion here that they're mentioning is that they're saying that Vashti was saying, we know this problem. This happened with Abraham and Sarah once before. You don't need to worry about that, but that's what she's alluding to. Anyway, illusion didn't work. Hinting at a past experience didn't work for her. So then she tried a different form of speech. She provoked him. He wasn't provoked. She said this thing that he didn't like. She is exiled or excommunicated or perhaps killed. We don't know what happens to Vashti, but her attempts to reason with the king through speech, through illusion, through messages, through provocation, this did not work. It's possible we can imagine that Esther would have received this history and she'd say, I'm not saying anything. There's no way I'm going to say something. I should have to keep silent because that is what's going to protect me. So we have two different versions here in the Midrash of what could be going on with Esther's silence. We have on the one hand that this is in her blood. This is who she is. She's not a talker. She knows from her heritage that silence has its advantages. Or on the other hand, maybe she is a talker, but she's just learned it doesn't work with this guy. I need to keep quiet to protect myself, maybe to protect my people also. But this guy, he doesn't take well to women talking back, no matter how they try to talk back. Okay, so we have these two different ideas of what's motivating Esther in terms of her silence. Let's go back to our story. Eventually, she does have to go in front of the king. And she goes in front of the king, she makes a banquet, and then he says, hey, babe, what's up? What do you need? What's going on? What's going on? And she says, and this is really interesting, I hadn't really noticed this before until I was reading the story again through the lens of silence. And she says to him, my wish, my request, right here, my wish, my request, if your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty, to grant my wish and accede to my request, let your majesty and Haman come to the feast. She's not ready. She doesn't ask for what she really wants the first time. What I had never noticed before is this repetition of my wish, my request. She's stammering, she's stuttering. She says, right? She doesn't have to say both my wish and my request before even she says what the request is, which she doesn't even request. She like waits and doesn't do it until the second time. But we see here that she's not ready to speak. She's not ready to come out of her silence. We don't know yet. I'm so excited to hear what everyone has to say. We don't know yet if it's because that's who she is and she's too afraid, she's not ready, or if it's because she's like, this is not going to work. I know it's not going to work. But she's stammering, my wish, my request. Now, interestingly enough, the Midrash tells us, shows us, imagines that Esther, she can talk. She's got what to say, this woman. Because before she goes and actually gets up the courage to ask Ahasuerus for her wish, her request, she actually prays. And we see from the Midrash that she has an extremely long and verbose prayer here. When she's by herself talking to God, she has an entire paragraph asking for what she wants. Lord, God of Israel, who has ruled since the days of yore and created the world. This is not from the Megillah. This is from the Midrash, just to clarify. This is what the Midrash imagines Esther prays. Lord, God of Israel, who has ruled since the days of yore and created the world, please help your maidservant. I've remained an orphan from my father and my mother. I'm comparable to a poor woman begging from house to house. So I'm requesting your mercy from window to window in the palace of Ahasuerus. Now, Lord, please grant success to this poor maidservant of yours and deliver the sheep of your flock from these enemies who have arisen against us, as you have no restraint to save by many or by few. You, father of orphans, please stand to the right of this orphan, which, by the way, is the word yamin, which is the same word as binyamin, which is to the right. So it's interesting. She's maybe saying like, you know me, the Benjaminite lady, who has relied on your mercy, and let me be viewed mercifully by this man, for I fear him. Lower him before me, because you lower the haughty. I mean, this is a speech. This woman knows how to talk, right? The Midrash isn't saying this lady doesn't like to talk. She doesn't have what to say. Maybe the Midrash imagines that she comes from the Benjaminite family and it's not their way. They practice silence for whatever reason. But this woman can talk. She's not a quiet girl. She has what to say, and she reveals that in a moment perhaps of solitude, in a moment of privacy, or she's just has a different relationship with God than she does with the king. I'm so curious to hear what people have to say, but I just want to make it clear that our tradition doesn't imagine that she doesn't have any, there's nothing going on in her mind. She's got a lot to say. She's got a whole paragraph worth of prayer that she's offering to God in her moment of quiet. So after she prays, she has renewed courage, and she actually does go in front of the king. And finally, in chapter 7, at the second banquet, the king and Haman come to feast. And on that second day, the king again asks Esther, babe, what do you want? What do you need? What's your wish? What's your request? What's your wish, Queen Esther? It will be granted to you. Don't worry. What's your request? Even half the kingdom, I'm going to give it to you. And she says, if your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted me as my wish, and my people as my request. Earlier, when you thought I was stuttering, when you thought I was saying, but my wish, my request, actually, I was getting ready to ask for two things, both my wish and my request. We've been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Had we only been sold as bondmen and bondwomen, I would have kept silent. for the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble. Now, this moment is so interesting in the context of everything we've been looking at so far. She says, I would have kept silent. I would have. And you have to ask yourself, given all of this, is it I would have kept silent because that's who I am? Or is it I would have kept silent if it hadn't been so dire? If I thought the silence would work, I would have stayed silent. But now in this new situation, I know I have to speak up. What is finally in this moment when she says, I would have kept silent? What is going on here? Is she going up against what she naturally is inclined to do? Or is the strategy no longer working for her? I'm going to leave that as an open question, as I believe our tradition leaves it as an open question. And I'm going to open it up to everybody during the discussion to weigh in, because I think we're left with an ellipsis here. Where is this moment where she actually does break out of the silence? Where is that coming from for her? What is she fighting up against? Is she switching strategies, or is she saying, my way doesn't work anymore? I have to overcome it here. So I'm going to leave that up to all of you. And you can tell me what you think is the more powerful choice.
Thank you so much, Zoe. We will come back to these really fantastic questions in about, I would say, in about 15 minutes when we have our discussion. I have a few that I want to add just for us to be thinking about. You quoted the Midrash about the craft of silence. And Rabba Wendy, when she was giving us a Midrash, she also talked about a statue that everybody sees. And it's interesting that you both brought models of art and artistry when talking about Esther and the choices that she makes. And I'd love to come back to that at the end. Thank you again. And you can take a nap. What we're going to do now is go back to the power plays. So people had filled out descriptions of times when they have faced either cases of being disempowered or cases of power. And I encourage everybody to go to our website and to see it. And I think it's going to be in the chat as well. In the meantime, Sarah Brooks, would you please read the first one? And I think Willa is going to share. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go to mine because the print is a little bit bigger, what you sent me earlier. Hold on. Okay, equal pay. It's 1976. Following college graduation, I landed a job as a public relations director of a Jewish community center in the city where I grew up. For the first year, it was a part-time position, and my office was literally in what had been a storage closet. I worked hard, redesigned all the publications, expanded our mailing lists, and got some great coverage in Jewish and general media. After an excellent review at the end of my first year, I was made a full-time, and my salary was increased proportionately to reflect the additional work days, but nothing beyond that. At the end of the second year and another great review, I asked for a raise. The director of the center, a man, told me there just wasn't the money for the budget for that. After working a bit longer, I realized they were taking advantage of me and the pay didn't reflect the value of my work. So I quit and went out on my own doing PR and strategic marketing. The center hired a replacement for me, a guy who they paid exactly the amount I had asked for with the raise. Shortly after I found out about that, I ran into the director at an event and asked him about it. Without missing a beat, he responded that my replacement had a family to provide for, so it was okay. For once, I was speechless. Sadly, that wasn't the last time in my career that as a woman, I was paid less than a man.
Thank you, Sarah. Andrea, would you please read the next one?
Absolutely. Too many stories to count. My first job as a Jewish professional at the age of 25, I worked in the allocations and planning department of my local federation, freshly minted MSW. The 4 committees that I staffed were all chaired by women, and the chairperson of the board was a woman for the first time ever in the United States. 2 of those chairwomen actually took me under their wings, mentored and taught me skills and insights that have stayed with me to this day. When I left the job, after a little over a year, because the power and politics within the organization were toxic, 2 of those women advocated for me to attend the 1988 Jewish International Feminist Conference in Jerusalem. American Jewish Congress paid for me to attend the conference with the caveat that I would come back and share what I had learned. That experience changed the course of my life.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So as I said in the beginning, HerTorah is really an experiment for us. It's a way for us to think together about what women's Torah could look like and how we can bring together women's own viewpoints and perspectives on Torah, but also our lived experience. So we see that in the Power Plays. We are also really privileged to hear tonight from Tali Farhadian Weinstein, who's going to reflect a little bit about the ways that she sees the book of Esther in her own life and in her own experiences. Tali, a former federal and state prosecutor, has spent nearly 2 decades working across a range of American legal institutions. Tali and her family came to America on Christmas Eve 1979 as refugees fleeing the violence and anti-Semitism of revolutionary Iran, and she in turn has dedicated her career to fighting for safety, fairness, and justice. After earning degrees from Yale College, Oxford University, and Yale Law School, Tali was a law clerk for Judge Merrick Garland at the U.S. Court of Appeals and at the U.S. Supreme Court for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Throughout Barack Obama's presidency, Tali worked at the U.S. Department of Justice, first as counsel to Attorney General Eric Holder and then as a federal prosecutor. From 2018 to 2020, Tali served as the general counsel of the Brooklyn DA's office, where she was part of the leadership team charged with implementing the office's criminal justice reform agenda and created the nation's first post-conviction justice bureau. Tali has taught criminal and immigration law and policy at NYU and Columbia Law Schools. Tali is currently of counsel at Kaplan, Hecker, and Fink, where she litigates public interest cases, and a legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. Her writing has appeared in many different places. She serves on the board of directors of the International Refugee Assistance Project and the Free and Fair Litigation Group, and she lives in Manhattan with her husband and 3 daughters. She has dressed up many times as Queen Esther for Purim,